Hello, welcome to video lectures of all of the lectures for the lighting part of the color and lighting course. Now the first two lectures we did complete in class, but I felt that's been a while ago, so I'm including them as a refresher. So I'm going to go in order, and I intend to do all of my lectures and post them for you to be able to review on YouTube, and I will get started. And so, lighting fundamentals. So this is just to give you an overview and an introduction to what we will be discussing for this part of the semester. So there are really three aspects to light that we need to take into account. And a couple of them are pretty obvious, and one other not so obvious. One is brightness, the other is color, and the last one is what we'll call texture. Is it going to be diffuse? Is it going to be very direct? So these are pictures from the textbook. I really like this textbook, The Architecture of Light. Maybe a little bit later I'll show you the cover of it. And I'm basing all of my treatment, for the most part, of lighting on this book. I find it very readable. It has really good illustrations. Enough. I don't get a kickback for this particular book, but let me say. So here we have bright versus dark. And one of the things we get bright illumination, gives you a bright kind of public feeling. Low lights are more calm and private. And when you lower the lights, then you have opportunity for contrast, so you can really highlight objects within a space. The other thing is we can choose colors, but primarily we're going to look at warm and cool, and they really have an effect. Warm, feeling cozy, intimate, and usually we opt for warm because we really like that look, but occasionally we'll do cold or cool light, which tends to be slightly bluish, where we really want to be able to see things really well, or give it a more kind of sanitary or cleanly kind of feeling, or make people a little bit more alert. We also can control color, particularly strongly colored lights. This can be a little tricky because they'll transform, unlike color applied to a wall, which does only a little bit to transform the light within a space. When you actually transform the light, everything in the space becomes, well, in this case, pink. We may not want that. That can be a little disconcerting, or maybe you want that. It certainly takes you away from the ordinary. We also will have now diffuse or textured light. Diffuse light's good where we want visual comfort, even light for tasks, and a more directional light is great where we want more drama. We want to see the shape of light. We want to make out individual objects. So these are some of the effects that we're going to really look at, and the overall aesthetics about how we deal with lighting. So when we look at lighting, and again, I'm taking this as a page from the book, take a look at a typical bedroom. And what the author says, and I agree with, is at the bottom is a typical lighting solution for a bedroom, where there's one overhead fixture and a switch at the door. That's okay, and then we would do, some lamps in the space. But if we can do it, let's look at where we want the light to actually go. So we would like light to be on the bedside. We'd like also a different light if we're reading in bed, to be at the top of the bed. In this case, we have a bench to dress on, so we want some light there when we're getting dressed. We have a vanity where you want to sit down and be able to see yourself in a good light. We have a dresser where we also want to have some light. A fireplace is a feature, and some bookshelves. So we can come up with a much more sophisticated lighting solution. The beauty of lighting, just like color, is there's more than one good solution. there are infinite number of solutions. Now this is an ideal solution and an expensive one. And we'll go over this symbols. By the way, luminaires is what we typically call lighting fixture. I'll probably use the term interchangeably, but because you're all professionals now, a luminaire is what we will typically call a lighting fixture. And what we see is we have some adjustable accent lights at the head of the bed and at the bedside, and one over the dressing bench. 2 decorative pendants that will give a nice complementary light at the vanity, a adjustable light in the ceiling at the dresser, decorative sconces to highlight the fireplace, and shelf-mounted accent lights, luminaires, for the bookshelf. Now this is an expensive solution because this is building in a number of fixtures that will be fixed to the ceiling. But there are other solutions as well. So they show a few other lighting solutions that maybe aren't quite as involved as the one above and will be less expensive. But we all like to be look at an ideal. So why do we study light as design professionals? And I have a little bit of a side note. I wish I had studied light a lot more thoroughly when I was in architecture school. We had a little bit on it and its aesthetics, but we mostly talked about it in a functional kind of way. And I think that there is nothing more important for setting mood and creating drama in a space or other effects than the way we treat lighting. And we, typically hold this over to lighting designers, but having worked as a lighting designer, it's really good to work with an interior designer or an architect that has a very clear idea about what they would like to achieve. So, with that, move forward. We need light. Our experiences are visual. If we spend a lot of time working on the color in our space and designing our space, if we don't light it well, we'll not get good color rendition, we won't see the space, and it definitely affects the mood. I use bright lights a lot in the winter when it's gray. It's gray right now today, even though it's spring, and I have all the lights on in my house. It really affects my mood and affects the mood of the space. And we can really emphasize architecture, although we won't be talking about architectural lighting, exteriors, that much in this course. Here's San Francisco City Hall during the day, a beautiful building. And here it is illuminated at night. Now, I might have done the lighting slightly differently. I would have probably put a little bit of highlights on those beautiful columns, but I think this is a really nice application here of how to do lighting, and they haven't even used color light. Here we create lighting for a mood, a festive occasion, and here we have light that's just fun for a silly occasion. These LEDs aren't shedding an awful lot of light, but they definitely set a mood. So, qualities of light: intensity, light or dark. Here, we have, in this case, a fairly high and bright lighting level, so we can see the merchandise in a high-end jewelry store. We could do this slightly differently, where there'd be more emphasis in the lighting in the cases. And obviously, we want to be able to control the lighting. So be able to dim the overhead fixtures, for example, separately from the cases. Here, in a bar, restaurant, we want a warm, intimate feeling. So definitely dimmer lighting we go with, and you'll see, restaurants vary. I kid, the more expensive restaurant, the lower the light level. That's so you can't see the prices on the menu. But there are some restaurants I've been to where I'm really glad that now we all have a flashlight on our cell phones, because I literally couldn't see a thing. I can't read the menu. Anyway, qualities of light: intensity, light or dark, and color, warm or cool. Now we'll get into this particularly with fluorescence and LEDs, and I will always have a little bit of a speech impediment when it comes to saying fluorescence. So excuse me for that. But here we have a series of fluorescents in a number of different color temperatures, from very cool to quite warm. And depending on the effect we want in the space, we want to do that. We want to choose those. LEDs also come in a range from warm to cool, and what's even more wonderful about LEDs is we can potentially adjust that for the effect we want. So here is an example of a relatively warm light to create a feeling of comfort and intimacy. Here's an example of a fairly cool light where we want to create a feeling of cleanness and modernity. The last thing we look at is texture. So intensity and color, straightforward. Texture, direct or diffuse. Here's a very direct fixture in that it is casting a very specific pattern on the wall. Here's another example of a fairly direct and indirect fixture in these sconces that are on this wall. Here's a very diffuse solution in a fairly dumb and not attractive space, but a typical office space. And we can have a mixture of the two within a space to really create variety. How do we view light? Well, our associations, our brain and our eye really work associations from the sun. You know, on a bright sunny day, noon, at sunset, on a snowy day, when it's gray and overcast in the winter. And our eyes are really, really good at compensating for daylight and accurately rendering color, even in these lighting situations, because it's something we've adapted to. How do we view light? Well, it also affects our mood. A space like this would not affect my mood very well. Pretty grim. Here, this is a lot cheerier and a lot subtler. Or in this situation where we have a bright retail interior. How is light viewed? Associates from the sun, affects your mood, informs your experience of the space. Here, lighting leading a path. I love doing this. A friend of mine did this for a New Year's party because she had a very long drive and she lit candles in paper bags to lead you from where you had to get off to walk up a very long driveway. And it was absolutely delightful. Here's some real drama and some colored lights, and we'll talk about color a little bit later, really accentuating this dramatic space. Here is a very minimal level of light where we just need a basic level of light for people to find their way through what is utilitarian space. Phototropism, we are attracted to light. We like light. Instinct tells us to follow light. So we can create a path and direct people with light, both if we want people to move through a space physically or just literally, rather to be able to follow a space by following light. We're attracted to light like moths are to lights. Some creatures aren't attracted to light, they're attracted to darkness. We like light. And one of the key things that if you learn from this course, is if you want to move people in a particular direction, is use increasing levels of light to direct them. We're attracted to it. It's an instinct that goes way back to when we were in caves. We had to shelter in dark places, but we like to look out onto bright prospects. So we like brightness. We like brightness for task lighting. I have an overall light and a task light for my home office. So we'll get into that. So, in design overall, this is a quote from the book, anything we introduce has to have a justification for being. Here, these columns, they need to be there. They have a structural verification. Likewise, the base of these trusses. Okay, these columns as well, they're decorative, but they're still there. We have to have that same justification, visual verification, that lighting is there. It's not arbitrary, it's there for a really good reason. Yet we have multiplicities of answers in terms of how we light a kitchen counter. But we do need to light that counter, and we can do it in a number of different ways. Here's another example. Kitchen table. We want to achieve greater impact with less light. Why? Because we'll get more drama and we'll also save energy. So we look at the way our physiology works, and that has to deal with the phenomenon of adaptation, brightness, phototropism, and vertical vision. So, adaptation. Our pupil, when we go into a dark space, dilates and lets in more light. When we go into a bright space, it contracts and lets in less light. Now, one of the really key things with this is that, and you've all experienced it, that if we go from a really bright space to a dark space, it takes a long time for our eyes to adjust. So you've had that experience. If you go from a brightly lit theater lobby into a movie theater and it's dark and the movie started, you'll find it takes a while for your eyes to adjust and for you to be able to find a seat. When we leave that theater, if it's a matinee and we go out into broad daylight, our eyes adjust fairly quickly because our muscles can contract a lot faster than they expand in our eyes. So it may be a little bit painful, the initial adjustment, but it happens a lot faster. So here's an overall lighting scheme, not very interesting. But this is what we want to do. It will light the space adequately for a typical open office plan, but this is what we like to do, is introduce some layers of lighting. An overall illumination and then brighter light just for the tasks. So we save light, we save energy, and we create a space that is actually a lot better for this adaptation, this going from dark to light. So here's an example of some task lighting along with an open office. Brightness. We need bright light if we have a low contrast interior. In this case, this is high contrast interior. The lighting is very bright, but this could be at a very low lighting level. We'd still be able to make out the different elements in the space. Here, where there's less contrast, we need brighter light to distinguish between the objects within the space. This happens if there's less contrast, if it's very light, or if it's very dark. We actually need to amp up the lighting. Here, where there's a nice contrast in the space, we can use less lighting. Phototropism will help us focus and direct us to things like these pictures in a gallery, or take us to this fun bar in this setting. Or direct us and illuminate objects in this really nicely lit kitchen. Vertical vision. Vertical vision has to do with the fact that, for the most part, illuminating our ceilings is important, and that's where most of our lighting is going to go. But we want to illuminate the walls, in this case with some sconces. This is where we often perceive the overall brightness of a space. So the light here we've introduced some decorative fixtures in a lobby in a hotel. And here we're really directing people to a spotlight. So we have adaptation, brightness, phototropism, vertical vision, all of these different features. How do we use these concepts? Identify the surfaces that best respond to lighting. So what surface do you want to light? And we'll give you the best result. Where do you want to focus information? Decide how people will use the space. How do we direct people? How do we say, move through here, relax here, etc. Identify vertical surfaces that will enhance the brightness of the space, and use contrast to create visual interest. So that's it for the first lecture. I will stop here, and we will go on to the next lecture.